beyond our geography. And it's so encouraging to us, and hopefully um, encouraging for the people that we connect with, like Dr. Tiffany Crutcher. But there are communities, there are people in many places that we just need to know that we're there. We need to know that we exist. But it's even better to go beyond just knowing that we exist, as vital as that is, but to connect, to actually have conversations with one another. Such a blessing. Perhaps one of the biggest blessings of these 2 years is connectivity, because we need it so much. The late Walter Wink, the theologian, one of the things he's known for saying is really, and I'm paraphrasing, what we believe most of all is not Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, or Judaism, but the myth of redemptive violence. We so easily resort to violence. It's such an easy solution, and yet it leaves so much damage, and it does not create peace. And Tiffany Crutcher's family knows this as well as anybody. Dr. Crutcher created the Tulsa Community Remembrance Coalition in partnership with Mr. Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative. Equal Justice Initiative is committed to ending mass incarceration and excessive punishment in the United States, challenging racial and economic injustice, and protecting basic human rights. This vital partnership is committed to changing the narrative about race in America. The Tulsa Community Remembrance Coalition, under the leadership of Dr. Crutcher, will lead a mass effort to memorialize the victims of lynching and racial terror in Oklahoma, and empower citizens to confront issues of racism with the goal of overcoming racial inequality through the building of the city of Tulsa's first comprehensive memorial and community remembrance work. She is a proud HBCU graduate, where she received a BA, MS, and clinical doctorate from Langston University and Alabama State University. She is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. And boy, I tell you, I'm just so glad that we are able to host you in this moment. Dr. Crutcher, you are in charge now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moore. Again, I'm truly humbled by the request to be here, and this space is so incredibly beautiful. The energy has really boosted my spirits this morning after being stuck on an airplane on the runway for several hours on last night and getting back from New Orleans from a leadership conference after midnight. But I'm thankful that I'm able to be here. And to all of your beautiful members, New Covenant Church, thank you for having me. Again, I'm Dr. Tiffany Crutcher from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And a little bit about me, I am a descendant of enslaved Africans, and also a descendant of a survivor of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, my great-grandmother, Rebecca Brown Crutcher. I am the daughter of Reverend Joey and the late Leanna Crutcher, who recently passed away to COVID-19. And I am also the twin sister of Terence Crutcher, who was killed September of 2016 at the hands of a Tulsa police officer by the name of Betty Jo Shelby. My twin brother, Terence, was unarmed. He had his hands raised in the air. He was leaving Tulsa Community College, and 15 minutes later after that, he was dead. Terence was a beautiful soul. We were 3 minutes apart. He loved to sing gospel music. The class he had started was music appreciation. And we found out that he didn't get the notice that his class had been canceled on that Friday night due to low enrollment. And so when he left, his vehicle stalled in the middle of the road. We found out that he may have been in crises. Terence was struggling with drug addiction. but he may have been in crises at the time. We just don't know. But nevertheless, Officer Shelby was headed to a domestic violence call and happened to see Terence's vehicle and decided to abort that call just to check things out. I truly wish he would have continued to the other call. But after about 2 minutes, Terence ended up dead. Betty Shelby, through her testimony, said that she thought he was experiencing a mental health breakdown or that he may have been high on something. She also stated that he wasn't threatening her verbally or physically. However, instead of giving him help, she gave him a bullet. She stated she had never been so afraid in her life and that he was larger than life. There was a helicopter looming over that particular scene with police officers in it. And on video, you could hear one of the officers saying that my twin brother, Terence, looked like a bad dude. Now, I'm not sure what a bad dude looks like that far up in the air. All I can suspect is that they saw the color of his skin. Terence wasn't belligerent at all. As a matter of fact, he was a teddy bear to us. He was my mom's compassionate son. He would give you the shirt off of his back. There were so many times we would wake up and there was someone on our sofa who didn't have a place to stay because Terence loved deeply. You would find Terence singing in church every single Sunday. He loved gospel music. You would find Terence feeding people who were unhoused in Tulsa after church. You would find Terence singing in the senior citizen homes, Amazing Grace, just to provide uplift. That's who Terence was. And so my family decided that we would control our story. We would control the narrative. We would let the world know who Terence was. He wasn't a bad dude. We turned that negative into a positive. And we turned that B into belief, and that A into attitude, and that D into determination, because Terence believed that he could overcome his struggle. He had one of the best attitudes, and he was determined to make me proud, to make his children proud, to make his family proud. And so 5 years later, even in this moment, we won't let hate, bigotry, or racism control our story or our narrative. And so as I go throughout just sharing my story with you all, I want you to take that away. We have to get good at controlling the narrative, because there's been a narrative of racial indifference in this country since the beginning of time. When Christopher Columbus came over and they said that Native Americans were beasts and savages and they had to civilize the land. There's been this narrative of racial indifference where Black people are deemed guilty and dangerous simply because of the color of their skin. There's this narrative of racial indifference, and we have to change that narrative in this country. And so Terence was shot and killed, and not one officer rendered first aid to him. If you look at the video, there were several other officers. They trampled over Terence to go and check to see if Betty Jo Shelby was okay. And my brother bled out and took his last breath alone. But for the first time in the history of Tulsa, a police officer was indicted, because we all saw what happened on video. And before that video was released, my family, we spoke to the world and we asked our neighbors to not engage in violence, but to protest peacefully and to respect the culture of our family, because we flow in love and we flow in peace. And we decided that we would do it a different way. I knew that the only way to fix what was happening and what continues to happen in this country, to Black and brown people was to advance policy, to change the laws. And that's the route we decided to take. And sometimes I vacillate. Did I lead us wrong? You know, I got a lot of backlash for flowing in love, but those are the principles that my parents taught me, Reverend Joey and Leanna Crutcher. They taught us agape love. They taught us to love in spite of, not because of who or what or lifestyles, but to love in spite of. And we look beyond needs, faults, and we see needs. And we know that love covers a multitude of faults. And so fast forward, Betty Shelby went to trial and she was acquitted on all of those charges. And the jury deliberated 9 whole hours. So we knew that somebody back there was fighting for us. But they came out and they penned a letter to the verdict saying that we don't feel that Betty Shelby is blameless and she should never be a parole officer again. But because of the way the laws are written, we have to render this not guilty verdict. It's the weirdest thing I had ever experienced. And it was painful to hear that she got away and justice wasn't sought. She went to the nicest hotel in Tulsa. We saw it on video, celebrated, drank champagne, and shortly thereafter start teaching other law enforcement officers around the country on how to survive the aftermath of a critical incident, how to get away with murder. That was another shot fired to us spiritually. She started teaching classes for the NRA, gun classes, because they deemed or felt that she was such a good shot because she was able to kill a Black man. Another shot fired for us. In the night of the verdict, I had to respond and react. And that's when I made the promise and the declaration that I would not rest until I transformed this city of Tulsa, who has a history of state-sanctioned violence dating back to the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. The same police department that burned down my great-grandmother's community, that killed unarmed Black men, is the same police department 100 years later that killed my twin brother. And I said I would dedicate my life trying to change that in this country. And some of the last words Terence uttered to me and spoke to me was 30 days before he was killed. I will never forget this conversation. I hold it dear. He said, "Sis, I'm going to make you proud. I'm an overcomer. And God is going to get the glory out of my life. And I feel that it is my duty to fulfill his prophecy." I believe that this particular moment in time is fulfilling that prophecy, is living proof. And so we started the Terence Crutcher Foundation in his name. I didn't really know how I would move forward. We were just so deflated after that miscarriage of justice. But I kept just feeling his spirit. And I said, we have to keep his legacy alive. He has beautiful children who feel bad right now, who we need to make sure that they don't have his same fate. And so we started the Terence Crutcher Foundation, which flows in 3 streams of work. And number 1 is honoring the legacy of our ancestors. And that's where the partnership with Brian Stevenson comes in. We believe that remembrance work is a radical act of love. I didn't learn about the Tulsa Race Massacre. I didn't know that my great-grandmother dealt with all of that trauma and had to flee to survive in fear of her life. I didn't realize that there was a conspiracy of silence. They told them, if you speak of this, you will be lynched next. And that's why they never said anything. It was erased from the textbooks, the history books. And I went to some of the best schools here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And they did not tell us that our ancestors were dumped in mass graves and hung and lynched. They didn't tell us any of that. And so we feel that it is our duty and obligation to right the wrong and to educate our children. And we do it through the erection of historical markers. We've went around to sites where the victims of the massacre, where they were lynched and killed, and we've collected soil and we've put them in jars, and we have displays where we can show honor and deference and properly memorialize and call their names. We've launched an essay writing contest where our children can reflect and tell us how they feel, not just about historical racial terror lynchings, but about current day lynchings, which is police brutality, which is mass incarceration. And so it's been a beautiful, beautiful, but painful plight, but we're getting it done. And so we're going to continue. We're excited to build the city's first comprehensive memorial dedicated to these lives. We have the Oklahoma City Bombing Memorial. There's the New York City Memorial. There's the but why hasn't there been a memorial dedicated to the African-American lives that were lost at the hands of white supremacy and anti-Black racism and racial terror violence? We also work on advancing policy. Right now, we're in the middle of a reparations fight against the city of Tulsa. We're working to combat the anti-protest bills at the state level, where the governor has signed a law where motorists can run over protesters. We're working to pass federal legislation around policing. Recently, they killed the talks around the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, but 2-3 years before that, I was at Capitol Hill frequently trying to get them to pass some remedies that would prevent Black and brown people from being killed at the hands of law enforcement in this country. And had they passed those laws back then, George Floyd would be alive, Breonna Taylor would be alive. And so I've worked at all 3 levels of government trying to advance policy that would protect Black and brown people in this country. And then that last work stream is strengthening communities, creating community autonomy, community agency, where we take care of ourselves, because we feel that whenever there's a community crisis or a community issue, it requires a community response. Law enforcement or police officers don't have to be the sole responders to every single issue. We have to find alternatives to what's happening and set our police officers up for success. And so we've worked diligently, and it's been exhausting for 5 years straight. This past September made 5 years, and we've had no justice. We're still waiting on the civil trial. My mom went to her grave not seeing justice for her son whatsoever, but we believe Tulsa is a true love story, because there was a Black teenage boy by the name of Dick Rowland in 1921 who was in love with a white girl by the name of Sarah Page, an elevator attendant. And it was said that they were actually in love, but when the elevators opened, she screamed, and a newspaper article came out that says, Black boy attacks white girl, nabbed the Negro. And that's when all hell broke loose. And all of the Black men of Black Wall Street and Greenwood marched down to the courthouse to try to prevent Dick Rowland from being lynched. You see, Black Wall Street was one of the most prosperous economic enterprises in the country. In the grim days of Jim Crow, we had doctors and surgeons and lawyers in our own movie theaters, grocery stores. We didn't have to go outside of our community for anything, libraries, schools. It was simply amazing. I realized that I come from greatness, and that my ancestors were so resilient and excellent. But it really wasn't about the love story of Sarah Page and Dick Rowland, the love story was about a community that loved no matter what your statue was, no matter if you were the shoe shine boy like Dick Rowland or the surgeon like Dr. A.C. Jackson. They were gonna protect their community, and they loved Dick Rowland that much that they marched down there and a gunshot went off. And then for 2 days, it was sheer terror and violence in the city of Tulsa. Tulsa's police department deputized white civilians and Klansmen and allowed them to go across those railroad tracks, those infamous tracks that delineated Black Tulsa from white Tulsa. And they stole and they looted and they shot innocent Black men with their hands in the air, and they burned down 40 square blocks of our beloved community. Helicopter or airplanes dropped turpentine bombs for the first time in US history. They bombed their own land because Black people were thriving and prosperous out of jealousy, out of hatred. And so generational trauma reverberates through my family's history. I've drawn so many stark parallels between what happened to Terence, my twin, and what happened to my great-grandmother's community. Terence, there was the helicopter looming over the scene. Nobody rendered aid to him. Betty Shelby got her job back. She got back pay. She got her record expunged. There's been no justice for my family. There's been no justice or reparations for the living survivors and descendants. The white citizens were able to file insurance claims because they lended out all of their ammunition. No reparations. The same culture that burned down Greenwood is the same culture and same police department that killed Terence. And so as I've learned from my mentor, Brian Stevenson, and people ask me all the time, how do you keep pressing forward? How do you keep fighting when you've been through so much? And so I had to figure out a way to turn pain into purpose and my anger into advocacy, my fear into faith, and my trauma into triumph. And some days it's not quite that way. Some days I'm in pain. Some days I'm angry. Some days I'm fearful of what I see happening in this country. And some days I'm traumatized. Every time I have to tell this story, it's triggering. But Brian Stevenson shares with me that hopelessness is the enemy of justice. And hope is all we have. We have to keep the hope. We have to get good at controlling the narrative. We have to act. I always tell people, once you know, you owe. You know, people ask questions, what do I need to do? Well, first you have to become aware. You have to become educated, because this whole notion of reconciliation has become a big business now. People are making money off of reconciliation and diversity, equity, inclusion, but creating these illusions of inclusion, not really doing the work. But it starts with simple truth telling, being honest, acknowledging. Truth and reconciliation are sequential. You can't have one without the other. And Tulsa has pretended to be one Tulsa, and it is not. Those railroad tracks still symbolize the same thing 100 years later, and that's the racial divide. Right now, Black Tulsans, you know, there's a wealth gap between Black and white Tulsans. Black children's life expectancy is 11 years less than a white kid's life expectancy on the other side of the tracks. We live in a food desert. There's no quality grocery stores. Our schools are under-resourced. Our schools are school-to-prison pipelines. But yet this mayor is touting one Tulsa when we live in a tale of two cities where Black and brown and poor people have been left behind. And how do we fix that? We have to get good at acknowledging and being truthful. And so we found ourselves, the Terence Crutcher Foundation, on the front lines of all things injustice as a backbone organization, fighting not just for Terence, but for everybody. And our issues intersect tremendously, and we have to stop making decisions daily as to who or what deserves our outrage. Terence deserves your outrage. Our poor people deserve your outrage. The fact that there are food deserts and gentrification running rampant in this country, the fact that our environment is eroding, it deserves your outrage. The fact that we can't make a livable wage with what they're paying us deserves your outrage. A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And so I've just been standing firm and thanking God for his supernatural strength, which sustains me, which helps me continue to fight. It's a love story. This work is rooted in love. And just here recently, Julius Jones, a young Black man who I consider my brother, was on death row. I couldn't prevent what happened to Terence because I had no control, but I knew that I could use my voice as a weapon and my rally cry to try to save Julius Jones's life. And we did that. We made calls under the leadership of CeCe Jones Davis and the Julius Jones Coalition. We ran a campaign in concert, and we marched down to the prison. And we knew that we would have to physically stop an execution if it came to that. And we were prepared because we love justice so much. But in the meantime, we have to figure out a way to stop the death penalty in this country. There's so many issues that's plaguing our country right now. But I know that my mother is looking down proud. I know that my brother is looking down proud, and they are guiding me and they are carrying me. And because I have their DNA, I get to see them every day when I look in the mirror. When I make a certain gesture, I see my mother. I see my twin. And so I want to close with some words from my brother Terence, who's right behind me. I want to speak as Terence these last few minutes, and I just want you to feel these words. I want you to just pretend that you're listening to my twin, because you know they say that twins have one soul. And so when I speak as him. Here I am, walking around thinking my Black is beautiful, that my tone and stature were acquiescent to nostalgia, sure to come of time and places. Time and places, I was considered regal. I was worthy. I was loved. Here I am thinking that my tone and stature served as reminders of strength and security, teddy bear hugs and midnight skies. I was a protector. But how did that go unnoticed? How did that get tarnished? How was I ever considered a big, bad dude? Here I am thinking that my hands, gentle, firm, and strong, symbols of love and peace, pressed together during hymnals while singing song, musically inclined, hands raised frequently to the heavens in worship, raised frequently in thanksgiving, raised frequently in service, now raised in the air, giving signals of submission, beckoning humanity, reminding you that my life matters, Mr. Officer. Take note, Mrs. Officer. I am here, Mr. Officer. Here I am thinking that I have the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. How sad that the living is now evading us and life so precious taken without consequence. Here I am believing in justice for all, and somehow my justice didn't come. Here I am thinking that the remnants that plague this very land we are standing are still here. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. Here I am thinking that all of us that we could use today as the start of something beautiful, and the world is waiting and watching, and we should make it worth their while. Here I am thinking that the tears were not in vain, and my hurt is serving a purpose, and even Christ suffered before the world could truly understand the weight that love could carry. Here I am, heavy in love, choosing change, even when I'm unsure of the method, vacillating between peace and let's burn this mother down, but always thinking, always praying, always choosing love. And God will get the glory out of his life, out of my life, because I am Terence Crutcher. Again, I'm humbled to be here. Dr. Moore, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you for having me.
Wow. Here's my little sister, Trina, Dr. Trina.
I think it's appropriate and necessary to take a moment of both silence and honor of Terence, and a few deep breaths. So I'm going to do that now. Just 3, breathe in deeply. Second breath. And a third deep breath for all of us. I'm going to be selfish and initially and begin with some questions that I want to pose before I open it up. I was thinking about the remembrance work and the ways in which we have chosen to honor other tragedies. And you spoke to the 9/11 memorial in New York, and thinking about Holocaust Remembrance Day coming up. And we will hear, remember the Holocaust, don't forget 9/11. So I want to hear your thoughts on how is it that there is an acceptance, an expectation of honoring and remembering the tragedies of some, and yet not for others, particularly the tragedies of Black folks in our country?
Great question. And you know, it's rooted in white supremacy at the end of the day. I wish I could answer that, but that is a question we've been asking for a long time now. Blacks in this country, we've always gotten the short end of the stick, even though we built this country for free. And So I feel that we can right the wrong, even though it's bittersweet, even though it should be on this city. In cities across this country, there were a lot of massacres. There was the Red Summer of 1919 massacres took place all over the country. The one in Durham, North Carolina, you know, the one in St. Louis, tons of massacres. But there's this unwillingness to admit guilt or admit wrong. And back then, lynching was legal. There was this unwritten law. And so to memorialize and to acknowledge would mean you have to abate the harm. You have to fix it. You have to repair the harm. And this city hasn't been willing to do that. However, they've been making money in the name of cultural tourism off of the centennial, off of our legacies, off of the history, building museums, and not one dime trickles back into the Black community. Not one Black person benefits off of it. The same city that is responsible is now making millions in the name of cultural tourism. And so we're doing our part through a legal strategy, and we're trying to get some policies advanced, but it is truly tough to work in this ultra-conservative state who just passed bills, a critical race theory bill, trying to silence our voice. And so, great question. And I think it's going to take other white people speaking up and speaking out. We always say, once you know, you owe. There's a white community of faith leaders here who are trying to do their part to repair the harm, raising money and giving to the survivors and the descendants, and reading prayers of confession and repenting for their ancestors and teaming up with us. It's going to take more of that. It's going to take more of that. But thank you for that question, Trina.
Where do you find rest? Or do you find rest?
You know, I get this question all the time, and I give an honest answer that I haven't been good at it. I haven't been good at self-care. I haven't been good at resting. You know, when I lost my mom, it was a different type of pain. And when I made that declaration and I said I wouldn't rest, I didn't realize how harmful that statement was. And self-care has been touted. It's kind of trendy now, but for me, self-care isn't quite the spa day or the pedicures or the facials. It's really having a support system around you. And I've done that right. I have this community of angels around me that shove water down my throat when I don't have enough sense to drink it myself, that will just be present when I'm on the front lines fighting. But this year was rough. And at the end of this year, I had a health scare. And so I've made a declaration this year to do things different. And one of my mentors said something, and the light bulb finally came on for me. He said, rest is a weapon. Rest is a part of your arsenal. And if you don't rest, you will not be able to win the war. Make that one of your, and I finally got it. And this has been just a few weeks ago. And so I'm drinking more water. I'm fasting, I'm praying. I'm surrounding myself with the right people. I'm building out my team. And I just have to do better. But there's one thing I do for myself. And every morning I get up at 4:30 a.m. and I feed my mind and I starve my doubts I read a daily devotion. I pray. I listen to worship music. I commit my thoughts to a higher power because I know that my thoughts are too toxic to navigate this crazy world that we're living in. And so I flow in a spiritual realm, or I would not make it with all of the tragedy that my family has endured, with the passing of my mom, with the passing of my twin, with the passing of my older brother, less than 2 years before Terence in 2014, who died of stage 4 colon cancer, with the passing of his son, my nephew, at the age of 16, who was hit 36 times by an AR-15, strict case of mistaken identity leaving church. We have been through so much. And so I have to commit my thoughts to a higher power, or I don't know if I would be able to function. And so I'm intentional with doing that. But I've made a declaration that I'm going to rest and do better this year. So I got me some good accountability partners.
I will commit to praying for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I deeply impacted by what you shared today. And I think part of it is being a mother of Black men. And when I hear stories of, that's the first place my mind goes. And I think about what you've shared about the officer and, the celebration and the champagne and going on to teach other officers and what that looks like, and hearing that from you as opposed to hearing that in the media. And I'm wondering for Terence and for your family in 2016, as this all was unfolding, what are your reflections? What are your lessons? And what was your experience as this story was being told by different lenses in the media?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely painful, because my parents, I stand on their shoulders, and they're such pillars in our community. They've served this community, they've served this city for decades, and everybody loves the Crutcher family. And to hear at the outset the narratives and the stories that were being told, and Terence was called everything but his name: a suspect, a thug, a drug addict, everything. But who he actually was of course painful to my parents. But I don't know if I'm there yet, but my mom and dad, people say that I'm strong, but they have this unique ability to bring communities together. And my dad went on the record and forgave Betty Shelby. And I don't know if I'm there yet. Our faith teaches us forgiveness. And so I forgive because that's what I'm taught, but it doesn't excuse the crime. And Betty Shelby has yet to show any remorse. She went on 60 Minutes and said, "I would rather be tried by 12 than to be carried out by 6. I had never been so afraid in my life. He made me do it." The mayor went on CBS Sunday Morning News just a year or so ago and said it wasn't about race, more so than it was about the insidious use of drugs. And so I've learned that respectability politics, because we came out saying, we're going to get it right in Tulsa. Tulsa is going to be the motto. I've learned that respectability politics, wishing and praying and hoping that a white supremacist culture is going to do right by us, hasn't worked. And so we have to come together. Everybody who believes in what's good and what's righteous and what's just. There's an African proverb that says when spider webs come together, they can tie up a lion. We have to align and come together and not just use rest as a weapon, but use our voice as a weapon. So I've learned so much about the system, and more than ever before, that there are two justice systems in this country. And the only way we're going to overcome and create a generational vision for justice and liberation is to come together and align on one simple mission. So I hope that answers your question.
I think sometimes, Zoom doesn't give us the opportunity to, for you to hear all of the feedback, whether it's the amens or the thank yous or the hums or the sighs, the everything, because everybody's muted as you spoke. But just to know that your words have landed deeply, and this community is grateful and responsive for what you've shared. And with that, I am going to open it up and take questions or comments from anyone else. I see Lania's hand.
I just want to thank you for being willing to go through and relive all of that. I just thank you.
Tiffany, I also want to thank you because we're lucky we get to hear the history, because we know how often it is not there for any of us to hear. Black people have always known that they have to at least let their families know what they know. But also we're lucky because if it wasn't in the books, then when it did come to the books, wasn't always correct. And those of us who lived through it know that. And so we're privileged to be able to hear directly from you. And I just can't even imagine how horrible I get, because I think my little things are killing me, and they can always be so much bigger. And I want to grow to that place where I can say it's a love story, because I know we all need to get there. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Ernie. I wanted to, we knew that we would be benefited from you presenting the story of your resilience, but of course, we can't experience your resilience without experiencing your sorrow, your grief, and your loss. And you'll have our condolences on the death of your mother, who I understand went into the hospital the same day as the vaccines were being rolled out. I wanted you to, if you would, say something about the resilience. There are 3 surviving members, people who are part of the community, Greenwood, and they're all centenarians. Would you say something about them?
Absolutely. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the 3 last known living survivors. We believe that there's more, but Mother Leslie Benningfield Randall turned 107 back on November the 10th. And we gave her the biggest birthday party, and she was so beautiful. Mother Viola Fletcher will be 108 on May 10th, I believe it is. And then Uncle Hughes Van Ellis, a World War II veteran, turned 101 just a few weeks ago in January. And he was 6 months old when the massacre took place. And if you hear his story, he cries about his older sister, Viola. Viola and Uncle Red are brothers and sisters. And, you know, he imagines what she had to go through running as a 6-year-old child, a 7-year-old child, in fear of her life behind their parents. You know, they try to imagine what their life would have been like if this massacre didn't take place. And so many times we hear people say, get over it, or, well, no one's alive who's responsible for it. Why should we be responsible? Why do we have to pay cash payments to these survivors and descendants? And it's just not always about cash. That's just one faction. But you have to realize there were hotels. I think about J.B. Stratford, who owned one of the nicest hotels, 3-story chandeliers. And just think, if the massacre didn't happen, he could have been the Marriott. He could have been the Hilton. He could have been the Hyatt. Our dreams were stripped away from us. And so it's so much bigger than that. And if it was about money, it would be okay. But the massacre caused a public nuisance. And that's our legal strategy, a public nuisance that has created continued harm. And I went through some of those things, whether it's the mass incarceration, police brutality. Black people are proportionately affected by these policies that are in place. And so they are amazing. They had their first day in court. It was historic a few months ago. And to be with them as they were wheeled into that courtroom, saying to the media that we believe we deserve justice. And they sat through a 6-hour hearing and didn't complain, not one time. And they said, whatever it takes, we're gonna fight. And it was just beautiful. And I was with them when they went to Congress to testify before the House Judiciary Committee. And I also testified as one of the descendants. It was just emotional all at the same time. Their first time flying to DC, and their testimonies will forever be inscribed into the books of Congress.
Do you think that our upcoming generation will do better?
Do I think that our upcoming generation will do better? You know, we have moments and we have movements. And this particular moment right now, this very second, I believe is paving the way for the movement. Movements transcend generations. And so it depends on what we do in this very particular moment. It starts with each and every one of us. When you look in the mirror every time you wake up, you see one of two things. You can either see the problem or you can see the solution, and you get to decide which one you want to be a part of. When I look in the mirror, I want to be a part of the solution. And so it starts with this particular moment in time and how we train up our children and how we pour into their children. We're either doing three things. We're either inspiring or expiring. We're either helping or hindering. We're either making deposits or withdrawals. I have decided to inspire, make deposits, and help be a part of the change I want to see. You get to decide.
Manea.
Ibram X. Kendi talks a lot about changing the policies in order to change some of the structures that are so damaging. And my question is, did this jury who could not convict the officer and cited the ways the laws are written, they could not see their way to convict this officer, did they specify which laws, or was that just an excuse?
I think it was an excuse because somebody could have hung the jury. I do know one of the excuses was they got tired and hungry. The DA said they didn't have the money in the budget to feed them. They didn't empower the jury to bring lunch, dinner. They didn't tell them you would be here until you came out with the verdict. And so they started getting irritated, tired and hungry because they went in that morning. And so that was one excuse. And I mean, my family would have fed them if that was an issue. But I think those are subliminal tactics. But the law, one of the laws is this use of force law, and words matter. And so you have to prove that the officer willfully or acted against reason. And so if you notice, you'll hear when there's an officer involved shooting, they'll say those 3 words: I feared for my life. I thought he was reaching for something. I thought the cell phone was a gun. I thought the brush was a gun. I thought I saw a weapon. I thought the car was getting ready to run over me. And so when they say those words, I feared for my life, it's that they acted within reason. And so it is next to impossible to prove what is going on inside of an officer's head. And so they get away with it. There's a use of force standard, Tennessee versus Garner or Connor v. Graham. Those are some of the Supreme Court statutes, which I've made it my mission to try to change. And even if we could just change the simple word to the officer acted reasonably to that they acted with a reckless disregard, that would give more people their day in court, because so many protocols are breached. She had ample time, if she was so afraid, to withdraw. You know, not one other officer would have pulled the trigger. She had her finger on the trigger instead of the taser. Terence was tased and shot simultaneously and tased again. It was excessive. And he wasn't under arrest. She admitted that she felt he was having a mental health crisis or he was high on something. And she said, I just wanted to help him, but she gave him a bullet. She could have just left him alone. He would have been okay. Terence didn't know what was happening. She said, oh, he looked like he was targeting me. She didn't know Terence had a prosthetic eye. She didn't know Terence was deaf in one ear. Nobody knew that, because we don't harp on that at all. Terence could still sing, but in his crises, he didn't know that the bullet was coming. And it pierced through all of his vital organs, and he took his last breath alone. So we got to change these laws, and we have to try to hold officers accountable through getting rid of qualified immunity that allows officers to commit legal murder without consequence. These are things that we need to fight for. And we were there. We thought we were getting across the finish line. And then, you know, they backed out on us. Senator Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham, who I met with several times, they backed out because we needed 10 Republicans to get it across. And he just used us as a photo op.
Other questions, comments? How are we doing on time?
Rosie.
I just want to jump in and say thank you too for sharing your story. It must be really difficult and draining to have to do so, but thank you. And it's really impactful.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Rosie. I want to say thank you so much to you as well. And my heart aches for all of what you've been living through. And I want you to know that it is vital for you to rest. Because, you know, it is also a war tactic utilized against people to deprive individuals from that. So I encourage you to do so. I'm having a very difficult time right now personally, but that's because I just lost my husband, my beloved husband, okay? But I wanted to say something that probably, you know, some of my brethren in Christ won't agree with, but I always say I keep it 100. And that is that, you know, this woman cop, my prayer for her, and God knows my heart better than I know my heart. My prayer for her is that she never have a day of peace in her life until she recognize and apologize for her horrific behavior. I have a nephew that was murdered 8 years ago, and they have not found the murderer. And I know they know who it is, but it has not happened. And Fillmore, California is also Ventura County in general is extremely conservative. Totally, yeah, white supremacist. They don't want to release that information. But my prayer from that day that it happened to my nephew to the present is, Lord, do not give them a day of rest, no peace in their hearts. It may sound foul, but I'm keeping it real. I'm keeping it 100 because God knows my heart, you know? And so that is my prayer, that this woman have no peace in her life, you know, and it may sound cruel, but I'm just being real because you know what? I'm so tired. I'm beyond fed up with the crap of people saying, oh, but you know, when Jesus comes, we're all gonna have, you know, those individuals are gonna get their day and they're gonna know then. Well, you know what? My Jesus is here with me every single day in me and my loved ones. And I say, you know what, Jesus? Justice now. Justice now. Justice now. God bless you, sister.
God bless you, and I'm sorry for the loss of your husband.
Thank you.
I think our time with you is closing, but I just have to say this. When you started and you were talking about coming in from the conference and catching the plane and getting in after midnight, and then I see you show up, you look amazing. Like everything about you, I would have never, ever known. And I feel like if I had shown up with that same story, I would look like I had just come in from the conference and got in after midnight.
Oh,
So
you're
you
too
look great.
kind.
You look beautiful. And you're so much of what you shared again today was perfect. The
Thank you so
message
much.
was absolutely perfect. So thank you. David.
Well, I don't know if Linnea's hand was up from before or,
Oh, is it still up? I thought.
okay. All right.
Sorry.
We're about to have communion, but this is not your focus, Tiffany, but you know, you mentioned this week is we're going to have Holocaust Memorial Day. And there's something this goes back to Trina's question when she first started asking about how some things are memorialized and others are not. I'm all in favor of memorializing the Holocaust, but I think it's hypocritical to ignore the fact that there were 10 million indigenous people on this continent. And then 100 years later, there was only 250,000. To me, that is the Holocaust we should be paying attention to first. Do you have any thoughts on that?
A lot of my colleagues and comrades in the movement, they say it all the time, not to compare, because last year I was a candle lighter for the Holocaust commemoration, and we're trying to really strengthen Black-Jewish relationships. But you're absolutely right. And we hold space for our Indigenous and Native brothers and sisters. And sometimes we get backlash when they say, why are you using the word Black Holocaust or things of that nature? But at the end of the day, we're so much aligned and have so much in common than not. And I do believe that you are spot on, and we should hold space for those millions of natives who were lost right here in this country and stripped from their land.
And there's a lot of overlap.
Absolutely.
My wife, Diane, she knew one of her ancestors in her lifetime who was full-blooded Creek. Their Creek
Yes.
in her ancestry, and Trina and I have Cherokee ancestry in North Carolina, and we also have ancestors from Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina. You mentioned Durham.
Yeah.
Where our ancestors, full of gravitas, were treated like children even when they were wrinkled and gray. And so we're still dealing with the vestiges of that. And we need people who are benefiting from the injustice to acknowledge it and to respond to it, because it's in their interest, right? It's in everybody's interest to come to the truth, and then we can move on to reconciliation.
That's right.
We're going to have communion. I kind of feel like we should hear from Emily, though.
I feel like I don't have much to say except thank you so much for being here and sharing with us. It's just always, I don't know, feeling very grateful to hear everything that you had to say. Especially one of the quotes that really stood out to me that you said when you were talking about rest and caring for yourself. You're talking about how you wake up and you said, I feed my mind and I starve my doubts. And I had to write that down because, I don't know, I felt like that was something that was really stood out to me. But everything was, yeah, I'm thankful to hear it all. So,
Well, let's have communion. This is a testament to the resilience of Jesus, the determination of Jesus, the ultimate experiencer of injustice, social injustice, and our example. So this is the body and the blood of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Would you eat and drink? Well, I can't tell you all how much I not just love you, but want to be physically present in some way, but those days are still ahead of us. Look forward to when we can safely meet and safely hug. And